So how can we be better ancestors, or how can the National Digital Twin Programme help us create the future that we want? Looking at everybody who's lived on the planet so far, there have been about 100 million, by estimates, of people who have lived so far. So the dead, if you like, 100 billion people. Currently, we have 7.7 billion living on the planet. But if we do some calculations and we look at the average birth rates per year in the 21st century and what we think that will stabilize at, in the next 50,000 years, we're looking at 6.75 trillion unborn generations coming after us. That's a lot of descendants. And we need to make sure that we leave them something worth having. David Attenborough said very recently that climate change within a lifetime could destroy entire cities and societies. And he said that he didn't envy the responsibility that it placed on all of us. Today, we stand between an enormous opportunity and an existential threat. The opportunity is that for the first time in history, we have the technology and the techniques to manage the built environment in a way that will allow both people and nature to flourish for generations to come. The threat is, if we let this chance slip through our fingers, we will allow a resource-hungry and wasteful built environment to destroy the ecosystems that we depend upon. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Centre for Digital Built Britain and what I mean by a digital built Britain. So we work on data. We work in data in the built environment, and I mean houses, I mean shops, I mean hospitals, I mean roads, I mean energy systems. So how does data help us with that? We need to think about, what do we need to know when we design a thing? Before we pick up our mouse or we pick up our pencil, what will people need to know about this thing that we're creating, this building or this asset? How do we make sure that we can share that data really safely? How do we make sure that we can give the data to the right people, but it's secure and resilient? How do we build the thing? How do we use data to help us build it better? How do we use those information management techniques to make sure that what we build is safer, better quality, and the productivity is better during the construction phases? And that what we get at the end of it is that shiny, wonderful new building that we want, or the great new road network. Once we've done that, we've got data about the thing that we've built. How do we use it? How do we, what we would say, how do you operate it? How do you live in the house? How do you use the roads? How do you make that work better? How do you use the data that we can get from sensors around the environment in which we live to allow us to use it better, more efficiently, using less energy, and for a better quality of life for people? So an example of this would be for lift maintenance. Let's make sure that we maintain the lift at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, because probably nobody's going to want to go up and down the office block then. So once we've got data about our individual buildings, how do we link those together to make sure that our built environment works almost as a machine to improve people's quality of lives? And how do we use that information to drive better design, better build of our economic and social infrastructure? So learning as we go along. So next time we do it, we create a better one. The built environment isn't just individual systems, individual buildings sitting around not joined together. We have our economic infrastructure, hospitals, power plants, transport systems, our social infrastructure, schools and houses, and we have our natural environment. All that together is what we would define as a built environment, and it is all linked. It is a system of systems. But that's the physical. What about the data that it creates? We call this a cyber physical system. So the physical built environment also is mirrored in the data world for a cyber built environment. Data from the physical goes to the cyber, and modeling and simulations create decisions and insights that allow us to feedback actions, interventions into the physical built environment to make it run better. When we think about the life cycle of our built environment, we often talk about the planning, the designing, the building, the commissioning, the construction, but that's a tiny, tiny part of the life of a building. The operation, the maintenance, the use of the building is a huge part. So we need to make sure that we're getting data from buildings that already exist. We know we still have some buildings that are from Roman times, and we certainly have plenty that are hundreds of years old. We need to use that data to use our resources more efficiently. And we need to know that when the life cycle of the building is finished, we can decommission it safely and in an environmentally friendly way. This is what we call the information value chain. This is how data links to how we use it. So at the bottom, you've got lots of little bits of information, lots of bits of data coming from all sorts of things from the built environment. It could be from the lift, it could be from the cars going past, it could be from people walking through with their mobile phones. We need to find a way of managing that data so we know that it's correct, the quality is good, and it's able to be read by people. Once we've done that, we can make sense of that data, giving us insights into how that built environment's being used, and we can put that learning back in to make sure that we get better data to help us use the environment better. But the key bit, the bit that was really exciting, is we can use that data to take decisions to make a better world for people. And once we've done that, we can use those decisions to influence the lives of people for years to come. Let's look at a train carriage, a physical one, the one on the left, the red. It's creating data all the time to create what we call a digital twin, this model of the train carriage, giving us insights and allowing us to make decisions to act back into the real world. But it's not just a train carriage on our railways. We've also got signals, we've got track. Each of those is a digital twin, a little simulation and modeling with interventions coming back. And imagine if we could link those together, we could have much more information and make much better decisions because we'd be deciding about the whole of the rail network. But it's more than just that. The rail network's connected to the airports and the air network and connected to the roads and the buses and the other transport networks. Let's link all these up together to make a connected ecosystem of digital twins. And then let's get even broader. Let's create a connected ecosystem of digital twins across different sectors of the built environment. So transport, energy, water. We connect these up, we get a really good idea of what's happening in our world and how we can make it happen more efficiently, better for people. And this connected ecosystem of digital twins is what we call a national digital twin. We believe that any national digital twin must be value-based. And recently we published the Gemini principles, which lays out the values. We think it's got to have a purpose. Why would you use it if it didn't? And that purpose has got to be for the public good. It's got to genuinely benefit the public. It's got to create value and performance improvement, and it must provide us with insights to be able to change the built environment to work better as a machine. It has to be trustworthy. The quality of the data that comes into it must be appropriate. It must be secure, and yet it must be open. And we need to balance between those two. Anything that's super secure will be very closed. Anything that's super open might not be so secure. So we need to balance those two. And the National Digital Twin must function effectively. We believe this is a federated model of digital twins. It needs to have curation, so we make sure that the data is always good quality and valid, and it needs to evolve. I couldn't have imagined that 20 years ago I would be standing here talking to you about a national digital twin. What might happen in the next 20 years? We know that we need to have a system that can take on new technologies and evolve. The benefits of a national digital twin are immense. In the short term, we will see benefits to society. People will see where their tax dollars are going. They will have improved customer satisfaction. For example, you'll get on a bus knowing it's going to arrive at the right time to get on your airplane to fly off on holiday. Benefits to the economy, better productivity, high performing and resilient infrastructure. Benefits to business, new markets, new services, new business models. And for me, the really key one, benefits to the environment, less disruption, less waste, more reuse, much greater resource efficiency. Digital twins are a key enabler of net zero and the circular economy, and without them, we won't hit those targets. So although there are massive economic benefits to the National Digital Twin, it's the societal and the environmental ones that make me really excited. So the National Digital Twin is about creating these better decisions for better outcomes. So I started talking about one Sir David. Another Sir David, David King, in 2018 said, what we do in the next 10 to 12 years will determine the future of humanity for the next 10,000. And I think he is absolutely right. So as we stand at the edge of this fantastic opportunity and threat, we must be determined to pull together to deliver the future that we want for the planet, which is the ultimate system of systems. If we use data intentionally to make better decisions for better outcomes, we really can create a future that we want for our children and our grandchildren and their descendants. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thank you for that introduction. I would now like to introduce Dr. Didem Gerda-Brew and Kirsten Lamb, who are two of the 7 authors of the 4 Futures, One Choice research.
Great, I hope you can see my screen and hear me. Hello, and first of all, thank you very much for taking time out of your evenings to listen to us talk about our study and the book, 4 Futures, One Choice. We had a lot of fun when working on this project. It allowed us to strategically think and imagine how the future may look like in 2040, which was a very exciting process.
Yeah, so in the context of everything that Alexandra just talked about, we use this method to explore, in 20 years' time, what does digital technology in the built environment look like? And then what does the rest of the world look like? So we'll be sharing our method as well as our recommendations for actions that we can all take to be better ancestors, as Alexandra put it, to leave a better world behind for future generations. We'll be doing this with some excerpts and some illustrations from our ebook, which was published in December 2020. By way of introductions as well, I'm Kirsten Lamb. I work for Center for Digital Built Britain.
And I am Didem Gerda-Brew. We are 2 of the 7 authors of 4 Futures, One Choice. And I hope you will enjoy imagining how Britain may look like in 2040 as much as we do. Let me start by stating the obvious. We are experiencing unprecedented times. The arrival of 2020 has brought with it some of the most turbulent global events experienced in generations. Global pandemic, political unrest, and environmental disasters have all contributed to 2020 being, for the majority, the very definition of unprecedented times. Yet we know that this is neither the first nor the last time that we will be faced with unexpected situations. And this is exactly why we did this study. When we started to work on this study in February 2020, there was no visible effects of pandemic yet. As you all know, in a few months' time, we found ourselves in the middle of ambiguity, uncertainty, and realized yet once again how unprepared the world was for this unknown. Why were we not prepared for pandemic? Why were we not considered these extreme events and planned for them? How much are we prepared for the next unexpected event? These were some of the questions that we considered while we were writing this book. 4 Futures, One Choice presents us with a future lens enabling us to view our 4 scenarios of what Britain may look like in 2040 and emphasizes the importance of the decisions that we are taking now in these unprecedented times. One important approach that helped us during this study was the 3 worlds framework. This framework highlights the 3 worlds, namely inner world, near world, and outer world. The inner world can be seen as our organizations. Then the near world is our partners, stakeholders, suppliers, customers, and so on. And the outer world is essentially everything else. For many organizations, it's natural to develop strategies for the future by adopting an inside to outside perspective, as we inherently assume that we will have a greater control over in the inner and near world. In reality, this is entirely the opposite. Future events unfold in response to the ever-changing context in the outer world. We can design the best strategy for today by considering our organization and our near world and think that it will work forever. But when an unexpected event occurs, we find ourselves in a very vulnerable position. This is why we have used outside to inside approach. And we would like to encourage all to use similar methodologies to not only imagining how the changes in the outer world may affect us, but also to be prepared to different futures and have series of strategies to guide us if when these scenarios happen. We want to make one thing clear. It's impossible to know what the future will look like with 100% certainty. The idea behind this study and the whole scenario planning methodology is not to predict how the world will look like. Instead, the scenario planning aims to provide a creative environment with a methodology where people with different backgrounds come together and provide their views on current trends and their importance of today. The future direction of these trends may be predicted for next few months or perhaps a year or two, but it is impossible to make certain predictions for the year 2040. The scenarios, therefore, are not predictions, they are foresights. To create this environment, we have organized a workshop in Cambridge and invited researchers from the Center for Digital Built Britain to work on understanding how Britain may look like in 2040. So we can develop strategies to make our built environment more sustainable, inclusive, and future-proof. In total, 16 participants and 2 facilitators attended to our 2-day workshop. The participants' research interests span from data science, digital twins, digitalization, to architecture, sustainability, economy, stakeholder engagement, and urban planning. These interdisciplinary group of people firstly worked on identifying influencing factors by trend spotting activity. We considered numerous perspectives by looking at different aspects of life. We have asked questions on how people may live, work, and how may they travel in 2040. How may the infrastructure look like and what will be the role of technology in that world? How economy and government may function in 2040 and what may happen to our resources. In the 4 Futures One Choice work, we have identified and studied more than 30 influencing factors related to the answers of these questions. I unfortunately do not have time to go through all of them, but I will just mention few. We studied sustainable development goals, demographics, COVID-19 and recovery of it, smart mobility solutions, changing working patterns and labor market, data regulations, privacy, economy, digital engagement, autonomous vehicles, education, taxation, and many more. These influencing factors may result with different outcomes in 2040. And this uncertainty of what may they result with and how these results might affect the built environment gives us the chance to build different scenarios. After considering all of the influencing factors, we have identified 2 important uncertainties that made it possible to define the 4 future scenarios. These 2 uncertainties are sustainable development goals and the age dependency ratio. We have chosen these 2 uncertainties because of various reasons. Firstly, even though we did not start the discussions by considering climate change or sustainable development goals, all of the participant groups had a point on this, showing that it was at the forefront of all of our minds when thinking about the uncertainty of the future. Secondly, the methodology dictates that we must choose 2 uncertainties to form 4 scenarios. We try to build scenarios by considering many combinations of uncertainties, but these 2 gave us the most to talk about, and the scenarios were very interesting to build on. Lastly, we know that some uncertainties are talked as if they are certain. which may not be really true. For instance, looking at the current trend on age dependency may lead people to think that there is no doubt that society in 20 years will be older. But we don't know how the future events or policy may change these demographics. Most importantly, this uncertainty requires completely different mindset and actions around how to design the built environment, workforce, and work environments. So let me explain what we mean by Sustainable Development Goals and age dependency. Sustainable Development Goals are the 17 goals that's set by the United Nations that envisions a world where built environment is a platform for the flourishing society and the natural world. The age dependency ratio is the number of dependent age citizens who are 0 to 15 or 68 plus years old who depend upon the working age population to support them. We have defined the outcomes of these two uncertainties as sustainable development goals may either result in success or failure, and the age dependency ratio can either be high or low. By considering these extremes of the two uncertainties on an uncertainty axis, we created 4 scenarios for 2040. These 4 scenarios then defined in detail by considering the 30 plus influencing factors that we have mentioned earlier. Now, Kirsten will present us these 4 scenarios. Kirsten?
Yep, thanks very much. So when we came to actually write about the scenarios, explore them, understand them, we gave each one a compelling title to sort of capture for the reader and characterize what that future was like. And we also wrote narratives about each one. The idea behind these narratives was to really place the reader in the shoes of someone who had landed in the year 2040 and was looking around them to see what the world was like. So it's very, speaking about it in the present tense to try and put the reader in the shoes of someone actually looking at that time period. So the first one we looked at was called A Legacy of Hope. And in this scenario, the SDGs have been achieved. So we're addressing climate change and related problems pretty effectively. And there's a high dependency ratio, which, as Didem said, means that the population's a bit older relative to the working age population. So there's a smaller working population. In this scenario, we found that digital technology would be supporting a shrinking workforce. So that's kind of the general highlights of what this world looks like. So I want to just give you some quotes to give you a sense of the narrative from the book. The UK has met most of the SDG targets, and the global temperature has stabilized below 1.5 degrees C warmer than pre-industrial levels. This has been achieved in the face of changing demographics. An aging population has meant new challenges. Digital innovations have proven instrumental in supporting public healthcare, well-being, a shrinking workforce, and rapidly decarbonizing the UK while building better infrastructure that allows communities to flourish. So in this scenario, the climate is still changing, but we're using digital technology to predict and prevent major disasters and live more within the means of the planet, as well as supporting the smaller workforce through automation, modern methods of construction, retrofitting the buildings that we already have that have changed use over the intervening 20 years. So the built environment looks very green, digitally enabled through shared data, with a fair amount of automation to support older adults and a circular economy. So in addition to the narratives, we also wrote testimonials from imaginary people in imaginary roles in the year 2040 to just kind of put you really in the shoes of different people that were living and working in that world, to kind of show the benefits of all of the futures and the drawbacks of the futures as well. So in this first one, we have a testimonial from Samira, who's a digital construction project manager, who says that she's been working in construction since 2024, and it's changed a lot over the course of her career. Using new techniques such as timber frames that have been built off-site and then assembled on-site. and using digital twins that will be handed over from the people who design it to the people who build it to the people who manage that building. And so she really likes that she can go home and tell her kids that the work that she's doing is making the world a better place by capturing carbon inside those buildings. This really highlights how, in this scenario, people might actually have a better sense of pride and of purpose in their work, because we'd all be working towards a common goal of a greener, fairer, more inclusive and resilient community. Our next scenario that we looked at, we called Generation Zero. In this one, again, the SDGs have been achieved, and there's a low dependency ratio, which means a much larger working population. In this one, we actually saw digital technology making life easier for people. So we defined Generation Zero as those who entered adulthood between 2015 and 2030, and saw them as being a generation really marked by political engagement online and offline from a very young age, and entering the workforce probably, unfortunately, in an economic recession because of the current situation. So to quote from the book again, Generation Zero have already seen their share of unprecedented events, from climate crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ensuing economic recession, to a vast reconfiguring of society and the economy around sustainability and social justice. This has made them more empathetic to others and more resilient in the face of uncertainty. Rather than focusing on what has been lost to climate change or what has been sacrificed from our former lives, Generation Zero reminds us that we must do what is necessary to ensure a better future for everyone. So the difference between this scenario and the previous one is that, maybe along with more immigration, the working age population has remained fairly stable, enabling us to rapidly transform the economy and technology in the UK, harnessing the will of young activists to transform our political and economic realities. So digital technology here is able to optimize life and increase accessibility of people to services rather than simply reacting to disasters. The testimonial in this scenario is from Tariq, who's a user experience designer for a mobility as a service platform. Who says that, when he was a kid, his dad was a bus driver and was worried that, Tariq wouldn't be able to work, in that field or in many other fields because of automation. But he's actually found that, although there is a lot more automation, including in the transportation sector, you still need people to design those systems. And so, he's found a really good balance, using his creative skills to solve problems for people and make sure that services are accessible. So he talks about the curriculum and how he really gets a sense of pride out of designing systems that work for people and make those services more accessible. So this really highlights how automation could really change the job market, but if we've deployed it thoughtfully, there are many opportunities for new careers that use humans' capability for creativity and compassion and decision-making alongside technology as actual partners whose skills complement each other. Our third scenario that we looked at is called Resigned to Our Fate. And this is where it starts to look a little more bleak because in this scenario, the SDGs have not been achieved. We're far off those targets for, being able to solve poverty, being able to solve, resource crises, and things like that. And in this scenario, there's a high dependency ratio again, so a smaller working age population. In this scenario, we saw digital technology as being really focused on predicting failures in the system and trying to, combat those and forestall those and reacting to crises. So to quote from the book again, with an aging population due to slower birth rates and low levels of immigration, there's a reluctance to change business models and behaviors. As a society, we are beginning to accept more extreme weather, resource scarcity, public health crises, and the collapse of ecosystems as a frightening, inevitable new normal. A privileged minority can afford to isolate themselves against the changes, moving to areas that are less impacted by air pollution, flooding, and frequent wildfires, for example, while the rest of the population is becoming increasingly vulnerable to these and other dangers. So in this scenario, we very much haven't beaten climate change, and the shrinking working population is having to cope with an ever worsening climate crisis, along with taking care of the growing number of dependents. So the built environment has become less of a priority. So it's a little bit crumbling, falling apart, and digital technology is really being used to help react to deteriorating situations, preventing bridge collapses because of extreme weather events and things like that. So the testimonial for this scenario, we have Wes who's a software engineer for a medical sensor manufacturer, who really enjoys, making a product that really helps people, especially, the growing older population. But he worries that, even with his good, software development salary, he would struggle to help his grandmother pay for the whole smart home setup if she ever needed it. And this really highlights how, without proper governance and coordination, the benefits of technology may only become available to wealthy people and therefore will deepen existing inequalities, which is an outcome we need to avoid. And our final scenario is too little, too late. As you can tell from the title, the SDGs, again, have not been achieved, but there's a low dependency ratio, meaning there is, a bigger working age population who might have been able to turn this situation around. And in this scenario, what we really saw was digital technology developing, but developing in silos. There wasn't a coordinated effort to bring things together. So to quote from the book for a final time, "The adult population of working age is larger than at any previous time in the UK's history. With a rush of energy and enthusiasm, the generation that entered adulthood in the early 2020s seemed poised to change the world. Instead, they met entrenched power structures that were resistant to change. Despite a groundswell of support for radical climate policies by young people, the changes made in the 20s and 30s were not ambitious enough to meet the need. This generation entered the workforce in an economic depression, and solving the climate crisis became a lower priority than restarting the economy, even as the effects of climate change prolonged the economic downturn. The built environment and legislative landscape of 2040 look very similar to 20 years ago, and the results of decades of exploitative economics are hitting the UK in terms of sweeping resource shortages and extreme climate events. So again, this scenario differs from the previous in the human resources we have available to respond to crises. While this stable workforce might have been leveraged to overhaul, the existing infrastructure and systems to make them greener, the governance wasn't in place to take advantage of this, and so the status quo remained. Progress on climate has been gradual and siloed, with organizations not sharing data, and so have not been able to address the scale of the problem. So our final testimonial is from Mel, who's head of digital security for a major London-based tech company, who talks about the freedom that they have to manage their data in their own ways and set their own security policies, but that actually makes it harder to do business because everybody has their own individual systems and can't really join them up easily to share data, so it takes much longer to do that. This really highlights how working in silos and not having common standards for data security and interoperability really slows down not just the speed of business, but the speed of the benefits that would come to society if organizations did share data responsibly and ethically across those silos. So these scenarios and testimonials really show how different the futures that we could be facing really are, and how important the decisions we make in the next few years are going to be to long-term outcomes. So I'm going to hand back to Didem to talk about some of the short-term priorities that we thought would really help steer us in the right direction.
When we have studied and wrote these scenarios, we felt right away the power of using them because each one of them sounds plausible, each one of them may happen, and as we already discussed, we also know that probably none of them will happen. But the importance of the work and the scenarios are not about forecasting what will happen. Instead, what we are after is to show how our decisions from today may shape completely different futures, not only for us, but also for our loved ones and the next generations. Before concluding this talk, I want to talk about a few important strategies and tips that we developed after considering these for different worlds. These hopefully can help us to change the future of built environment for better. We mainly identified 3 strategies. Firstly, we suggest thoughtful investment in digital technology, where we put the people and the planet first. Enable value-led procurement guided by moral and ethical principles, and we build smarter. Secondly, we suggest to prioritize decarbonization and biodiversity, because we all know that we are already too late to do this. There is no more time to lose. We should use modern methods of construction, value natural environment as much as the built environment, adopt circular economy, and join forces to develop the built environment which benefits all. And lastly, we suggest to develop governance for today for a better tomorrow. We should make ourselves accountable. Pilot social income support options such as living wage or universal basic income, support and adopt green information economy, create sustainable and caring jobs, and enable wider participation and engagement of the citizens.
Yep. So, as Didem was sort of saying, the decisions we make now will really push us towards different futures that we can't yet predict. We don't know which of the 4 futures we'll end up moving towards. But digital technology, like connected digital twins, which Alexandra talked about at the beginning, can really help us better understand the complex world we live in, that system of systems that she talked about. But it can't tell us exactly how the future will look. So we need to prepare for multiple different futures and understand how to make the best decisions for people and the planet in any of those futures. And digital technology isn't the only thing we need to get right. As Didem discussed, there's also governance, social and economic changes we need to make. But what we need to do right now is decide what kind of future we want to live in and act accordingly. There will be unexpected and unprecedented events that happen over the next 20 years. And the only way we can really be ready for them is by looking at a range of possibilities and preparing to be flexible and resilient. So what we really want to leave you with from this work is that each of us make choices every day about what we eat and what we buy, about how we travel, about how we work. And all of those choices kind of steer us towards one of these 4 futures or another future that we haven't even imagined. We can start by making a difference now by using this method to make better decisions that lead us towards a more sustainable and equal future that we really want to see. So one last thing we want to let you know about is that we actually wrote this book. We wrote it in plain language so that you should be able to enjoy it. But we also wrote it for kids. So for those of you with kids age 8 to 11, we wrote an interactive children's book, which launched last Friday for a Cambridge Festival. And it features an animated choose your own adventure style story. This book lets children explore through the eyes of 10-and-a-half-year-old Zoe what sort of jobs and skills might exist in the 4 different futures and how digital technology is working in the built environment in those futures. There are also resources in the book for learning more about digital skills for the built environment, such as coding and design. But the book also highlights that other skills such as creativity, environmental understanding, and compassion especially will be really necessary for creating a built environment that's better for everyone. So if you're interested in finding out more, as you can tell, we've put out this work in multiple formats for as many audiences as possible because we believe it has value for everyone, for academics, for people working in the built environment sectors, but also just the general public and children. The ebook we discussed today, again, it's written in plain language, but it's thoroughly referenced. So if you want to explore the issues that we talked about in more depth, there's a wealth of information in that book. We also recorded a panel discussion with all of our co-authors, so you can hear from a bunch of different disciplinary points of view, and that's available on YouTube. There's a link on the slide there. And that was as part of a Cambridge Zero program, and it was on the Beyond BIM podcast. So please do check out any of these versions and get in touch if you have questions or to let us know what you think after doing so. But for now, we just want to thank you for your time and ask if there are any questions from the audience. Please carry on typing them into the chat. Thanks very much.
Hi, so just having a look at the questions that have come in. We've had 4 questions in, which I'll just put to you in a second. And we've also had a nice observation from Todor, who's talking about how he's been involved in futures initiatives for some time. So it's a nice observation about how future scenario planning is approached in different nations. That's interesting. So in terms of questions, we have had a question from Uliana. What role do you believe renewables will play in case sustainability goals are not met? To what extent they'll be important, and what other innovative sources of energy will be found?
I'm happy to have a crack at that and let anyone else step in with any gaps that I leave. Definitely renewables are vital, whatever scenario we're in. You know, we weren't picturing that any of the scenarios are. We've absolutely turned our back on the planet and we're setting fire to everything. We weren't really picturing that as one of the scenarios. In all of them, we're trying to move in the right direction. It's just the speed at which we actually take it up. The important thing to note is that because we're talking about a lot of digital technology and a lot of digital services throughout the built environment, that relies on having clean energy to power all of that. So it is a really crucial component. You know, there's no good in you know, putting sensors everywhere and everything if they're, you know, the way that they're being powered is by more coal plants, you know, putting out, you know, more carbon into the atmosphere. So it is really vital to any of these futures that we move in that direction.
Great, thank you. And there's a question from Maria, which I think we might have covered in the second half of the presentation, but if there's anything else you might want to add, just maybe a question to the panelists. Which of the scenarios do you think we might be heading towards?
Do you want to take that, Didem?
We wanted to be in the middle of any of the scenarios. That's what the methodology asks us. Basically, when we have the axis, today should be in the middle of all the axes. We hope to head towards one of the positive scenarios where we can achieve the sustainable development goals, and also deal with all the complexities that is already existing in built environment and society. So I don't think that we are heading any of them. We just completed it and wrote. But we are hoping with the new pandemic's effects and the understanding and the young generations especially being passionate about the climate change and pushing us towards the direction that will be positive. But also we see in many other cases that we are falling behind, and we already started this game a bit late. So we look quite positive. That's one thing to keep in mind, but we need to be cautious also. So was it cautious optimist? That is what we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question about just asking for some examples of a digital twin, and also a question from the same attendee, just wanting to know where you have connected digital twins, what kind of data might be linked from really different types of sectors, so across transport and waste or water systems. What kind of data might be shared?
So I'll take that one if I may. So if you think about a city, you've got people using the transport system, you've got people living, they're putting their rubbish out, that's collected by people, well, certainly where I live, in trucks using the transport system. They're using energy. We have people cooking, heating their houses. That is an ecosystem, as you were. So if we look at what the future demand is for energy on any given day, we can adjust the generation of energy and the storage of energy to adapt for that. If we think it's going to be colder, we can increase the energy available for heating. If we think there's likely to be a lot of waste because it's been a holiday period and it hasn't been collected next week. We can adjust the number of buses, vans that are used to come and pick it up. It's all interconnected. It's like a jigsaw piece, but it's like a massive 3D jigsaw. So what sort of data do you need to share? The things that are relevant. So for example, a power plant wouldn't need to know what was happening to the tires on a bus, but it may well need to know if it's an electric bus, how many miles it's likely to do, and therefore when will it need to be charged. So it's about thinking about how are those connections and what data is needed to be passed on. And an example of the digital twin, I'm going to choose one that's not from the built environment. Actually, I'm going to choose one that most of you will see on the TV, which is a Formula One racing car. They have the most fantastic digital twins monitoring it on a millisecond by millisecond basis and tuning it to make sure that it works at its best. Now, imagine if that were one of our cities rather than an F1 car. What could we do with our city if we looked after it that well?
Can I just pick up on a point that Alexandra made? The question was sort of phrased as, you know, what data would you join together from these different systems? And I think that's not where you start. What you start with is the purpose. What do we want to know? And therefore, what data has to be joined up in order to answer that question? Because if we just start joining up data because we can, then that just becomes too much information for anybody to deal with and do reasonable things with. Whereas if we start with a purpose of, we want to make sure the system is more efficient, we want to make sure the system is more accessible, we want to make sure that, you know, this system is more reliable, then, you know, then we can really start to understand what data from those different systems we really want to match up in order to answer those questions.
Great. And we've had a few more questions coming in. Somebody wants to know, what recommendations would you make to someone who would like to get involved in this field, and what kind of practical or soft skills would you need in order to work in this kind of environment?
Maybe I can get this. I think it doesn't really matter what domain you want to get involved. One thing that the life taught me, and all the research and the studies we do points out, is to do something that you care. If you find yourself that you are caring about what you do, you will see that you will be very successful and you will benefit not only yourself, but the teams that you belong also will benefit from your knowledge. I tell this to every young people who are looking for, what skill do I need? I think currently the technology is affecting everything, including education. And we need to educate ourselves continuously and learn new skills, new tools continuously. If we do the things that we care, learning tools doesn't bother us. Learning new skills doesn't bother us because we have this caring mindset that we want to be helpful on this particular subject. So then you will get lots of experiences and skills development. This is the new world. We are not anymore getting one job and staying in the same position for 20 years. Especially the next generation will change their professions and their jobs and the definition of their jobs, even the domains that they belong, much more frequently than today. So I think the most important thing is to be passionate about what you do and care for it. And I think for me, that is the most important thing that will make this world a better place, really.
Thank you. We've had a question from Joe, who would like to know, what methods did you use to identify the scenarios, and also a bit about why you chose the Sustainable Development Goals as one of the variables.
Do you want to go ahead and take the methodology question, Tita?
Yes, I am the methodology person. So, So what we did was basically participants are coming from different perspectives, different domains. They normally do research on different parts of the built environment. For instance, I am a data scientist. So my daily life is about how I can make cyber-physical systems by using data more interoperable, more efficient, and so on. So certainly for me, when I choose influencing factor, I say, oh, data is very important. But this methodology wants us to come together, listen each other, and agree on things. So this way we see different viewpoints, different perspectives, and understand why it is important. So me and Kirsten, we basically negotiate about what we care and what is important related with built environment from our perspectives. So these 2 days showed us that we sometimes easily negotiated and agreed upon things. And one of them was sustainable development goals. That's why it is also one of the 2 uncertainties that we choose to use further. But also we had other influencing factors that we didn't agree, or even though we agreed, we didn't think that they will affect the built environment. So basically, we limit our study for the built environment related trends and influencing factors and agreeing upon them. And we believe that bringing together 16 people who works on built environment and do research on this and making them negotiate and agree on 34 influencing factors is enough convincing way to select them.
Thank you. We do have a couple more questions coming in. I think we'll just take one of them, and we can always get back to people afterwards if we don't have time to cover any more. There's a question from Jordan. What impact, if any, do you see in the unpredicted consequences of implementing smart city technology? So that would, thinking about things like the security implications, changing cultural and social values. So I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll start, and then if anyone else wants to jump in. So I think this is a huge and very important question because we would be intervening in such complicated systems. It's really hard to know what impacts those interventions will really have. And we've already seen with the development of digital technology how risky that is for especially vulnerable people. You know, we've seen algorithmic bias really excluding certain people from services because the algorithm has repeated, centuries-old biases that we ourselves have. So technology isn't completely neutral. It's, it's not completely objective. It's actually, it carries our biases with it. And if we, implement it poorly, it can really have disastrous consequences. So I think this is somewhere where, the technologists and the futurists and those other ists really need to pay attention to philosophers and social scientists and community activists to really understand who's being brought in and to talk to those communities as well. Not just sort of assume that we know what's best for people, but really understand, how can technology meet your needs? Are you willing to let it meet your needs? In what ways is it or is it not acceptable? I think it's going to be a process of negotiation over the next decades to really understand how to ethically and responsibly, use technology in smart cities in ways that don't have those unintended consequences.
Just to add, smart cities are really important steps toward a more sustainable future because we already have cities and actually they are not managed currently smartly because of many reasons. And we are really talking here systems of systems and really complex systems. When we bring on top of already existing city complexity a technology to make it smarter, which is also another multidisciplinary and another level of complexity, and try to see how the society will benefit or maybe not benefit from this kind of intervenes or new approaches is very important question. There is no one answer really if it is going to happen this way or that way, but surely we are talking about more data, we are talking about more integration, we are certainly talking about Internet of Things, 5G, and several more factors that we considered. And that's why one of the strategies that we mention starts with thoughtful technologies, because bringing a technology is one thing, but having this future perspective, multidisciplinary perspective, and seeing how these interrelated trends may affect society, life, is a very important perspective. And it is one of the reasons why we did this study, because we really believe that we should already from now consider this and look for the future so we can prepare ourselves with different strategies to deal with this complexity.
Great, thank you. Well, we've reached the end of our time, so there are a couple of other questions, but we'll follow up and answer those by email. But thank you to everybody who joined us for this session. We hope that you did enjoy it. Please do complete the questionnaire. Let us know how you found it. Check out all the For Futures materials on our website, and do drop us an email if you would like a hard copy of the book. We're happy to share those with everyone who's attended this event. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.